I don't think I'll ever forget the smell. It was this thick, moldy dampness that seemed to settle into my skin. That's the first thing that hits you when you enter a place like St. Michael's. That, and the fact that the building just feels wrong. It wasn't just abandoned. It was rotting. Like something that wanted to be forgotten but wouldn't let go. I'm not exactly sure why I agreed to it in the first place. My friend Adam had this idea that we could explore the old asylum and film it for his urban exploration channel. It's the kind of content people love. The creepy vibes, the hidden rooms, the promise of something mysterious. Plus, he thought it would give his channel a boost if we found something spooky. But St. Michael's wasn't just any abandoned building. Built in the 1920s, it had been shut down after rumors of abuse and malpractice started surfacing. Apparently, some of the patients just disappeared, and no one could explain where they went. The place had been empty for decades, and there were stories of people going in and coming back out. Different. People said there was something wrong with the air, that it made your thoughts twist in ways that felt unnatural. I didn't believe any of it, though. I figured they were just stories, rumors to keep kids away. We arrived just after dusk. The building loomed against the sky, the windows dark and hollow, like empty eye sockets watching us. Adam was all excited, his camera in hand, narrating as we made our way in. I followed him, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence. The crunch of broken glass underfoot, the distant creak of the building settling, the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. The main hallway was lined with rusted doors, each one slightly ajar. I don't know why, but the sight of those doors made me feel uneasy, like each one was a trap waiting to spring. There were peeling signs on the walls, identifying rooms for therapy, observation, and solitary confinement. I couldn't help but shiver at that last one. I remember thinking about how lonely it must have been for the patients here, how abandoned they must have felt even before the place shut down. We made our way through a series of empty rooms, Adam whispering commentary into his camera. Most of the rooms were gutted, with nothing but old furniture and scattered papers. But then, we came to a door that seemed different. It was heavier, solid metal, and unlike the others, it was firmly closed. A rusted sign above it read, Ward E. "Let's check it out," Adam said, grinning as he pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, and a draft of stale air washed over us, thick and sour. The smell was so strong I gagged, but Adam was already inside, panning his flashlight around and muttering something about how creepy it looked. I followed, though everything in me screamed not to. I still don't know why I didn't just turn around. The ward was lined with small individual cells, each with a narrow bed and a single chair. Most of them were empty. But as we moved deeper into the ward, I noticed something strange. In some of the cells, there were remnants of what looked like personal belongings. A shoe here, a torn piece of clothing there. Even a small stuffed bear, its button eyes staring at me from the corner of a cell. "Do you think they just left all this stuff behind?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer. Adam shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe they just forgot. We continued down the hallway, and that's when we heard it. A faint scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I felt my skin prickle, and Adam stopped looking at me with wide eyes. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely more than a breath. We stood there frozen, listening. The sound came again, louder this time, and closer. It echoed off the walls, a slow, steady scrape, followed by a pause, then another scrape. We should have left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming to turn around and run. But instead, Adam gestured for us to keep going, motioning that we'd check it out and then head back. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he thought he'd get good footage. Maybe he just wanted to prove he wasn't scared. But whatever it was, it pulled us deeper into that horrible place. The sound led us to the last cell in the ward. Unlike the others, this one had no window, just a thick iron door with a small viewing slit. Adam hesitated, but then he lifted his camera and peered through the slit. His face went pale and he stumbled back, almost dropping the camera. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart pounding. He didn't answer, just shook his head, his eyes wide and frightened. Against my better judgment, I stepped up to the door and looked through the slit myself. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, but then I saw it. Something moving in the darkness, a shape hunched over, slowly dragging itself across the floor. The thing was wearing what looked like a patient's gown, but it was old and tattered, barely hanging off its thin frame. I could see its hands, pale and twisted, dragging its body inch by inch. It had no eyes, just empty dark sockets staring back at me, unseeing but somehow aware. Its mouth was open in a twisted grin, showing rows of broken, rotten teeth, and its head tilted unnaturally as if trying to listen. I stumbled back, my stomach lurching as I realized it was crawling toward the door. It was slow, but it never stopped, never hesitated, like it knew we were there and was determined to reach us. "We need to go," I whispered, grabbing Adam's arm, but he was just standing there, staring at the door, his face blank and empty, like he was in a trance. I shook him hard, and finally he seemed to snap out of it. Without another word, we turned and ran, bolting down the hallway, our footsteps echoing as we sprinted toward the exit. But as we reached the main door, I glanced back one last time, and I swear I saw it. There, at the end of the hall, dragging itself after us, its mouth stretched into that horrible grin. We burst out into the night, gasping for air, and didn't stop running until we were back at the car. We sat there in silence, the reality of what we'd seen sinking in. I wanted to tell Adam to delete the footage, to forget about the whole thing, but I could see it in his eyes. He was thinking about how much attention this would get, how many views he'd rack up if he posted it. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking. "Just don't." But he didn't listen. A week later, he posted the video. At first, it got the usual views, comments from people saying it was creepy or that he had great editing skills. But then something strange started happening. People began noticing things we hadn't seen. A shadow in the background, a faint whisper on the audio. Things that weren't there when we filmed. And in every video since, people have been commenting about seeing the same thing. A figure, pale and twisted, lurking just at the edge of the frame. Always watching. Always waiting. Adam stopped posting a few months after that. He said he needed a break, that he wasn't feeling well. He stopped answering calls, and I heard he even stopped leaving his house. The last time I saw him was in a video he uploaded late one night. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and he was talking about seeing things, about feeling something watching him. His voice was thin, almost like a whisper, and his eyes kept darting off camera like he was listening for something. And then, at the very end of the video, just before it cut to black, he looked directly into the camera and whispered, "It's here." That was the last anyone ever heard from Adam. His channel went dark, his phone was disconnected, and his apartment was found empty, with no sign of where he went. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about St. Michael's, about that thing in the cell. And I wonder if maybe he's still there, somewhere, locked in the darkness, waiting. And every now and then, just when I think I've forgotten, I swear I can hear it. A slow, steady scraping sound, inching closer and closer. I never thought I'd end up working in an abandoned asylum, let alone getting hired to clear one out. But, as it turned out, when your construction business hits a slump and you're desperate for work, even creepy old buildings start to seem like a good opportunity. It was called Whitmore Asylum, a massive, crumbling beast of a building, rotting on a hill just outside town. It had been shut down in the 70s, supposedly because of funding cuts, but locals whispered about patients vanishing, doctors gone mad. To them, Whitmore wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. Our job was simple enough. Clear out debris, remove anything salvageable. I had a couple of guys with me, but by the time we actually stepped into the place, none of us felt as tough as we pretended to be. The place was still furnished with ancient medical equipment, like someone had just left. Gurneys rusting in the halls, file cabinets spilling documents that probably hadn't been touched in 50 years. And the smell, like mold and something else I couldn't place. Stale, almost metallic. About a week into the job, things started to get weird. It was a Tuesday afternoon around 3 p.m. We'd worked our way to the East Wing, patients' rooms, small cells with thick metal doors, chipped white paint, and narrow glass windows. It was in there, room 217, where I heard it for the first time. A voice. Low. Faint. Almost a whisper, but definitely there. At first I thought it was one of my guys, but then I realized it was coming from inside the wall. It said my name. Eric. I froze. My crew was working 2 halls over. No one was anywhere near me. I told myself it was my imagination, that maybe the name Eric was just a coincidence. But then, the whisper came again, softer, like it was fading away. Eric, help me. I backed out of the room, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just an echo in the old pipes or something. I didn't tell my crew. They'd laugh, or worse, refuse to come back, and I needed this job. But after that, I started noticing things. Small, unsettling things. I'd hear footsteps behind me, but every time I turned, the hall would be empty. Sometimes I'd hear faint laughter, just a quick, echoing sound. Then nothing. One time I even heard crying. A low, pitiful whimper that echoed through the halls, too clear to be any creaking wood or groaning pipes. Then, one afternoon, I found the journal. I was clearing out a storage closet, buried under piles of dusty patient files, when a slim black notebook caught my eye. It had a name on it, Dr. Marston. Curious, I flipped it open. The entries were dated around 1968, and the handwriting was erratic. Sometimes neat, sometimes a scrawl. The journal was unsettling, to say the least. Dr. Marston wrote about breakthroughs with patients, methods that, frankly, sounded horrific, like isolating them in pitch-dark rooms, playing recorded sounds on loop to break through their delusions. But the later entries were stranger, and I could feel my skin prickling as I read. The walls. I swear I hear them whispering. They say my name, call out to me. How could they know my name? Another entry. I am not mad. They say it's my work. They say it's the spirits of the patients, but that's nonsense. Still. Last night, I heard the laughter. It was so close. The final entry, barely legible, read, "If anyone finds this, Listen to the walls. They hold the secrets. They hold the truth. They're alive. At that point, I was about ready to run from the place. But then the rational side of me took over. I chalked it up to some unhinged doctor who'd gone over the edge. His journal was creepy, sure, but it didn't mean anything. Or so I thought. Then Friday came. It was late. Maybe 9 p.m. We'd stayed to finish up the East Wing, and the other guys had already left for the night. I was packing up my tools when I heard the whisper again. But this time, it was louder. Like the voice was closer. Eric? I turned, scanning the hallway. Empty. And then, clear as day, the whisper continued. Help me. Please. Eric. I stood frozen. It was right there, barely 3 feet away, coming from the wall in front of me. My heart hammered as I stepped closer, pressing my ear to the cold plaster. And then I heard it. Muffled, but unmistakable. The sound of scratching, as if someone was trapped inside. A jolt of terror shot through me, but I found myself calling out, Who's in there? The scratching stopped, replaced by a whisper so soft I had to strain to hear it. They won't let me out. I yanked back, my head swimming. This was insane. But somehow, I couldn't make myself leave. I had to know more. I felt around the wall, my fingers trailing along the old chipped paint until I found a weak spot. I grabbed a crowbar from my bag and started prying at the plaster. The wall crumbled easily, as if it wanted to give way. A small hole opened up, revealing a hollow space behind it. I peered inside and there was nothing, just empty blackness. But the smell, God, that smell, hit me hard. It was like decay, damp and rotten, mixed with something metallic. And then I saw it. Something scrawled on the inside of the wall, faint but unmistakable, scratched into the wood. 3 words. Don't trust them. I stepped back, shaken. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw a shadow moving inside the wall. But when the light steadied, the shadow was gone. I backed out of the hallway, barely breathing, and practically sprinted out of that building. After that night, I stopped going in alone. But things only got worse. The whisper spread. Other guys started hearing them too, low voices calling their names, asking for help. A few of them quit outright, saying the place was cursed. And the walls, they started finding more messages scratched into them. Small, cryptic phrases. Help us. Don't leave. They watch. Finally, we reached the main building, the records room where they'd kept all the patient files. I was clearing out the shelves when something cold brushed my hand. I yanked my hand back, looking around, but no one was there. That's when I heard it. The laughter. A hollow, empty sound, almost like a child's giggle echoing off the walls. My skin crawled, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at the shelf. There, jammed between 2 old folders, was a small photograph. It was black and white, faded, and on it was a woman, staring directly at the camera. Her eyes were wide, dark, and haunted. Written in small, neat letters at the bottom was a name. Margaret Green, patient number 217. The woman from room 217, the one whose voice I'd heard. I threw the photo down, my hands shaking. I was done. I didn't care about the money or the job. I just needed to get out. I headed down the hall, praying I'd make it out without hearing any more voices, but just as I reached the main entrance, the whisper started again. Louder, more insistent. Eric? Stay. I bolted, practically tripping over myself to get to the car. As I sped away from Whitmore, I felt a weight lift from my chest, but the whispers, the scratching, the messages, none of it has ever left me. A week later, I got a call from my boss. They'd finished clearing out the building, but he sounded shaken. "You know that room 217? He said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. "They found a body, Eric, walled up in the plaster. It was Margaret Green, and get this. Her hands were raw, like she'd been trying to claw her way out. I didn't sleep for days after that. I still hear her voice sometimes, in the dead quiet of night, soft pleading. Help me. Eric. It's been years, but I can still hear it even now. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the walls around me like they're pressing in, trapping me in just like her. And no matter where I go, I know I'll never escape those whispers in the walls. I'll be honest. I don't usually believe in the paranormal. I've worked a dozen security jobs in the weirdest places, from abandoned malls to shuttered hotels, and I've never seen anything that couldn't be explained by raccoons or broken plumbing. But last year, I took a shift that's made me question everything. I don't think I'll ever set foot in that place again. It was the old Willow Ridge Asylum. I'd seen it once or twice before, sitting alone at the edge of town like it was trying to hide. People said it had been abandoned in the 1950s, when the state cut funding. The place had been left to rot, boarded up and sealed off. Teenagers would try to sneak in sometimes, but the cops would always scare them off. The property management company I worked for was hired to do a sweep. Someone had broken in, they said, and trashed a few of the rooms. My boss wanted someone on site to make sure it didn't happen again. When he told me that it'd be an overnight shift, I laughed. Just one night, alone, in an abandoned asylum? No problem. Or so I thought. I showed up around 8 p.m., just as the sun was setting. The place was massive, sprawling across acres of dense forest. It was silent, except for the distant chirping of crickets. The old red brick building looked like it had 1,000 eyes, its windows broken and hollow, each one dark and staring. Inside, the air was heavy with decay and mildew. My flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness. Peeling wallpaper, shattered glass, old wheelchairs left to rust. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence of what this place had once been. But the thing that struck me the most was the smell. It was more than just mold and dust. It was stale, like something that had been festering for years, trapped in those walls, unable to escape. I made my way down the main corridor, checking doors and windows, my boots echoing in the silence. Every room I passed felt like it was watching me. My radio crackled from time to time, breaking the silence. But that only made things worse. And then I noticed it. Ward C. It was supposed to be locked up, but the door was ajar, swinging slightly. I hesitated. I'd been told that nobody had been down there in years. The entire ward was apparently sealed off due to safety concerns, but the fact that someone had managed to break into that area made my skin crawl. Still, I had a job to do. So I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Immediately the temperature dropped. I remember shivering, even though I was wearing my thick security jacket. The smell here was different. Sour and metallic, like old blood. The rooms were cramped, lined with small barred windows, and most of them still had old hospital beds. Some were covered in torn sheets, others bare and rusted. I could see the restraints on the bedposts stiff with age, and I wondered about the people who had been kept here. As I walked, I noticed something odd. Every few rooms there was graffiti, names scrawled in faded ink or scratched into the walls. Thomas, Janie, Elijah. They looked like children's handwriting, and some of the letters were backwards or shaky, like they'd been written in a hurry. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, a low hum that grew with every step. Then, from the end of the hall, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping I stopped, holding my breath, listening. It sounded like something metallic, tapping against the wall, slowly, deliberately. I thought it might be a pipe, but as I got closer, I realized it was coming from one of the rooms. Room C13. The door was slightly open, just enough for me to see the edge of a bed and what looked like a small, dark shape sitting on it. I felt my stomach twist, but I couldn't look away. I inched closer, gripping my flashlight, and slowly pushed the door open. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was a young boy. He couldn't have been older than 10. His hair a mess of dark curls, his eyes wide and staring at the floor. He was tapping his finger on the bed frame, over and over, in a steady, eerie rhythm. He was dressed in a hospital gown, the fabric thin and faded. But there was something wrong. His skin was pale, almost translucent, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years.
"Hey, kid," I said, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He didn't look up. His finger just kept tapping, tap, 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 on the metal bed frame. I felt a chill run down my spine. My flashlight started flickering, casting shadows that seemed to twist and bend on the walls. "Are you lost?" I tried again, stepping closer. That's when he looked up at me, and I swear, I've never seen eyes like that. They were blank, empty, like he wasn't really there. And then, in the faintest voice, he whispered, "They won't let me leave." I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I felt trapped, like the air had turned to stone around me. I wanted to scream, to turn and bolt, but my legs wouldn't move. The boy tilted his head, his eyes still fixed on me, and then he pointed to the far corner of the room. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. Another figure, this one much taller, standing in the corner. It was a man. Or at least, it looked like one. His face was shadowed and his body was twisted, bent at unnatural angles like he'd been broken and put back together wrong. He was smiling, wide and grotesque, his teeth glinting in the faint light. The boy whispered again, "He's coming for you." That was all it took. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and sprinted down the hall. I could feel something chasing me, hear its footsteps echoing just behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I burst through the door toward C, slamming it shut behind me, gasping for breath. But the nightmare didn't end there. As I made my way back to the main entrance, I noticed something strange. Every room I passed now had scratches on the doors, long, deep gouges like something had tried to claw its way out. And faintly, just barely, I could hear that same rhythmic tapping, echoing through the halls. I radioed my boss, told him I was leaving, and practically ran out of that place. I quit the next day, handed in my badge, and refused to take any more shifts. A week later, I got curious and did some digging on Willow Ridge. Turns out Ward C wasn't just for the mentally ill. It was for children. They'd been kept there, isolated, experimented on. Some of them, they never left. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I swear I can still hear that faint tapping just outside my window.